Today is April 20, 2018, and we recently had the new moon of the first scriptural month, and we are going to continue studying on the topic introduced in that meeting, which is a text known as the Gospel of Truth. So before we get into that, let's ask our Heavenly Family to guide us. Heavenly Family, thank you for teaching us the need of being humble and willing to be corrected and to learn new things, even if they conflict with our preconceived ideas. Please help us in this meeting to be rid of our preconceived ideas and to have a longing, earnest desire to really know the truth. Help us to see the value of truth and the power of truth, and help us to be able to understand the gospel more clearly so that we can be able to benefit others by it and to change this world. Thank you very, very much. Help us to see the gospel of truth for what it is. Thank you. We ask this B'Shem Tzemach Huahi, in the name of Branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
So, just as a brief reminder to everyone, on the new moon, we talked about a text known as the Gospel of Truth. We had some intro material to it in which I explained that even though it was initially thought that the Nag Hammadi library was a Gnostic collection of literature, that is demonstrably not the case, even though there may be Gnostic texts within it. But this collection, the Nag Hammadi library, which again, it was found in 1945 and contained 13 codices, 13 books, ancient books, with several independent pieces of literature in each one. So it's actually a whole library of literature, and much of it was written by people who professed belief in Jesus, and it's literature from the first 4 centuries of the Common Era. So we took a look at the fact that it has been assumed by many that this text is a Gnostic text, but the text itself does not bear that out, and it actually has a message which is very similar to the Apocryphon of James, and also very similar to this message. And in fact, in this message, this present message that we are proclaiming today, we have focused a great deal on the nature of truth and its difference with error and all the things related to that, what stems from that. And we have definitely talked about this from the perspective of materialism, and in that light we have explained how error and lies are really nothing. And this text, the Gospel of Truth, whenever it was written and by whomever it was written, it speaks of some of these same things in a very similar way, and it also speaks of the mission of Jesus in a way very similar to how we have spoken of it. So, in going through this writing on the New Moon Call, we only went through the first small section of it, really. But there is a lot more to the Gospel of Truth. And I hope that all, and if not all, hopefully at least some of you have taken the time to read it, either in full or in part. And we're going to be studying it a little bit over the next little while, at least till the next new moon. And it may be interrupted, of course, with the Passover feast and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, since during that time we will most likely be focusing on the question of the historicity of the Exodus. So really, on the calls, as with any subject, we can only cover a portion of the subject, and in order for anyone to understand it more fully, it is absolutely necessary for individual study. There's really no replacement for it. So it's a great thing to study during the dailies too, just so you guys know. With all that said, I want to ask first if anyone has any questions or comments regarding the Gospel of Truth, and maybe that will occupy our entire discussion. If not, though, if you guys would like me to just share more concerning it, kind of continuing on from the new moon discussion, then that can be done as well. But if there are questions and so on, we can deal with that first, and then we might get into kind of a verse-by-verse type study of it as another possibility. So does anyone have any questions or comments related to the Gospel of Truth?
I just have one question. Trent, in New Moon, you had mentioned the translation you were reading was by Marvin Meyer. Was there a co-translator by the name of Willis Barnstone, or was it just Marvin Meyer, the translation you were reading from?
Okay, so just to be clear, the translation that I was reading from is not the translation by Marvin Meyer or by anyone else. I made use of multiple different translations in putting together the best I could deduce kind of the most accurate translation. So like for each passage, I would compare all the translations available to me and all the notes which have relevance for the underlying text, and then use that to put together like a combined translation, kind of like one phrase might be from Marvin Meyer's translation, one phrase might be from someone else's translation. It's all still there in the translations, but it's not what you'll find in any one of them. So that's important to keep in mind. What you might be thinking of is that I read something from an introduction to the Gospel of Truth in Marvin Meyer's translation of the Nag Hammadi Scriptures. That one is just called the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, the revised and updated translation of sacred Gnostic texts, and it's edited by Marvin Myers, and there's an advisory board, and the introduction was written by Elaine Pagels. The translation itself is just by Marvin Meyer.
Okay, so basically you compiled your own using different translations, and you chose the best ones that you found?
Yeah, and you know, it's difficult to do since I couldn't find, like, okay, what I was hoping to find is something in Logos Bible software which contains the Coptic text, because the copy of the Gospel of Truth that we have is in the Coptic language. And if it had the Coptic text, then I could look up individual words and so on. But I couldn't find that because Logos is mostly run by evangelicals for evangelicals and Christians in general, and most Christians consider the Nag Hammadi Scriptures to be heretical, so there aren't a lot of resources on it, but there were some, and there are multiple translations out there. So what I was able to do is just take the various translations, compare them, and a couple of the translations that I was able to get had notes regarding the text itself, and sometimes discussions over different possible translations. So that's helpful in order to access the text, and you can kind of get used to, like, what is going to be a more word-for-word translation, what is more interpretive, and so on. So by making use of all of the resources available to me, I was able to combine them to get as much knowledge of the text as I was able. So that's how I ended up with what I actually read on the call. It's a combination of several different translations, and some of it isn't even the exact wording that's in a translation, but it's from like a textual note that was in one of the translations, that sort of thing.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Are there any other questions or comments on this text? Well, I guess there may not be at this point, and that's okay. I guess we can just continue on studying it. And who wouldn't want to do that? Teresa and I were reading it earlier during the dailies today. And seriously, guys, like, I really recommend reading this text multiple times. And the other thing that I want to say is that it is so important to be familiar with the text itself rather than just what people have to say about it. Sure, it's worth looking at what people have to say about it too, but ultimately the standard is what the text itself has to say. And before kind of diving into the text again, I just want to mention that the Nag Hammadi library has been widely interpreted as being a Gnostic library, and the texts in it have been read as Gnostic texts. And if you look up what scholars have to say on it, many scholars are just, let me put it like this. Scholars are specialists, but scholars are also teachers. And usually what a scholar teaches on is broader than what they specialize in. And so for those parts of what they teach that are not their specialty, they will rely on works that they have read from other scholars. And since they don't specialize in that area, what they might teach in that regard might be out-of-date scholarship, or might simply be incorrect, and they might have an incomplete understanding of it, whatever the case may be. So, when you look at what many scholars say about the gospel of truth, and then you compare it to what the gospel of truth says, some of it is just obvious, radical misinterpretations. Like, some scholars say that the gospel of truth basically has nothing to say about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. That's not true at all. I mean, it's not a narrative of his life, but it definitely talks about his death. It has a parable about him. It even talks about his death as being part of God's means for teaching us the truth and saving us. So it's really interesting. Also, it clearly talks about Jesus being incarnated, or the Word of God being incarnated into flesh, which is totally anti-Gnostic. And it talks about the world and even the worlds as being established by God, the Father. That's totally not Gnostic. But you'll find scholars saying things like, oh, well, the gospel of truth teaches that the material world was not created by God or made by God. It teaches that the material world is evil. but that's just interpreting it through a Gnostic lens. There's nothing in it that actually says anything like that. And so after seeing some of what scholars have to say and how much it does not match what the gospel of truth itself has to say, I looked up some more of what scholars had to say, because I knew that some scholars had recognized kind of that this isn't Gnostic. So I just wanted to read something to you guys that I came across. I haven't read this whole book or anything. Literally, I just came across this paragraph. So I don't know the full perspectives of the authors, but it's something interesting that they point out. It's from a book called The New Testament and Gnosis, edited by Alastair Logan and Alexander Wedderburn. And on page 138, they make an interesting statement. It is now widely recognized that Jean Dorés's characterization of the Nag Hammadi codices as a Gnostic or even a Sethian Gnostic library was unwarranted. The original owners and users were more likely heterodox ascetics who had joined one of the Petromian monasteries, which had been founded during the first half of the 4th century CE near the present town of Nag Hammadi. This means that the individual tractates can no longer be assumed to be Gnostic, but must be shown to be Gnostic on internal grounds alone. It is not enough to be able to claim that a writing can be read in a Gnostic way, or that it seems to presuppose Gnostic ideas. For that can be said of many ancient writings which are clearly not Gnostic in origin. Thus, a significant number of Nag Hammadi texts can no longer serve as primary evidence of Gnosticism. Since these include such well-known tractates as the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Truth, the consequences for the relationship between the New Testament and Gnosis are considerable. It will require a good deal of difficult and painful rethinking. So, anyway, I just came across that paragraph, and I certainly think that it far better characterizes the reality of the Nag Hammadi codices than the view that it is a Gnostic library.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, read the Melchizedek text in the Nag Hammadi library. It's clearly not Gnostic, and it specifically opposes ideas that are Gnostic. The Apocryphon of James is nowhere near Gnostic. It really presents Jesus as being so very human and so very personal, and like he places himself on the level of his disciples, and he raises his disciples up to be on his level, and he talks to them about my cross. He said, you know, you must seek my cross, and Peter and James are like, oh, Master, don't speak to us about the cross. That's far from us. So, I mean, you know, Gnostics evidently believed that Jesus was not actually crucified, did not actually die, was not actually part of the material world. You know, that's all totally the opposite of what we find in the Apocryphon of James, and likewise in the Gospel of Truth and the Gospel of Thomas. So, yeah, anyway, I just wanted to mention it to you guys, that not all scholars kind of go with the older scholarly view of the Nag Hammadi library being Gnostic. There are scholars who recognize that That's certainly not the case, even though there may be Gnostic texts in the Nag Hammadi library, but it cannot be characterized as Gnostic as a whole. So anyway, the only way to really know the difference, though, the only way to know for sure for yourself is to actually read the text. And you have to see what it says and how it presents things. So with that said, to briefly summarize what we looked at so far in the Gospel of Truth, we read a little bit at the very beginning of it. The first part introduces the Gospel of Truth. It really emphasizes truth. It emphasizes the fact that the Gospel is to reveal to us the truth about God so that we can come to know the Father, and it can be our means of discovery, and it's a joyful thing. Following that, there's a section dealing with the origin of error. And very interestingly, the way the origin of error is described in the Gospel of Truth is, in essence, the same as how it has been described by this message. That being that it is simply the case that we don't know everything, and our lack of knowledge on everything means that we may view some things initially incorrectly. There is potential for misunderstanding. That's not a result of sin. It's just the nature of reality. Our first guess as to what something might be isn't always right. There's nothing sinful about seeing a mirage. It just has to do with the way reality is and our sense organs. It's just how it is. And so if we end up misperceiving something and we don't put our perceptions to the test to see if they are correct, and even more so, if we cling to our conception, regardless of whether it's correct or not, well, that's the birth of error right there. And this text describes that, and it actually describes a female being who is called Error, and her experience in misunderstanding God and the resultant fear and the resultant clouded judgment producing error is vividly described in this text. And of course we read also from the Odes of Solomon in Ode 38 verses 1 to 13, which also describes error as a being who is the antithesis of wisdom. She is the counterfeit bride, and she, along with the deceiver, seek to and succeed to a great degree in deceiving the world and causing people to drink in deceitful doctrines. And that idea of being deceived, being likened to drunkenness, is something which is apparent in the Apocryphon of James and also in the Gospel of Truth. After the description of error, we read a description of Jesus as the fruit of knowledge, and how he brings us the way that it puts it in the Gospel of Truth is, he enlightened them and showed them the way, and that way is the truth he taught them. It's a beautiful passage describing Jesus' work in saving us from error and sin by teaching us the truth, and also how error was very upset with him and persecuted him and sought to destroy him, but ultimately she, error, was made powerless. She was brought to naught, because even though Jesus died, his death would be the means of life for many, of course, because it is such a magnificent and vivid demonstration of love. So, I'm going to try and see exactly where we left off. Since we've been reading this again, I'm not remembering exactly how much we read and how much we actually really got into explaining. So I'm wondering if anyone here happens to remember. I know that we read more than we unpacked. Does anyone here remember the last part we unpacked? Did we only go as far as the end of the section on error? And did we not unpack in any detail the sections dealing with Jesus as the fruit of knowledge?
I don't remember talking about the fruit of knowledge. Anyone else?
My notes show forgetfulness did not exist with the Father, although it existed because of him. So that paragraph. But there's another note here that I'm going to check and see that might be more current.
Okay, so yeah, I think that that's correct. That we read the section of Jesus as the fruit of knowledge and Jesus as guide and teacher, but I don't think that we ended up really unpacking those. And it's interesting, I noticed that you said that forgetfulness did not come into being from the Father, but it did, because of him. That's how it is in Marvin Meyer's translation, but other translations give a different reading, which makes way more sense in the context and is more likely accurate. And that is, I'll read how it is in another translation. It is not in the Father's company that forgetfulness came into being, and surely then not because of him. On the contrary, what comes into being in him is knowledge, which appears so that forgetfulness might be destroyed and the Father might be known. So the entire context is the Father not bringing about and having to do with forgetfulness. Rather, it's the Father who brings about knowledge, which is to destroy forgetfulness. Okay, so anyway, I think that pretty much where we were at then, in terms of unpacking a section, has to do with Jesus being the fruit of knowledge and so on. So the last part that we really discussed was how forgetfulness came into being because the Father was not known. So as soon as the Father comes to be known, forgetfulness will cease to be. And we described how this is the whole idea of cause and effect. It's very, very simple. If one thing causes another, you have to remove the cause in order to remove the effect. So, in order to remove the effect of forgetfulness, we must remove the cause of ignorance of the Father. So, we will read again this next section. And actually, you know what? I'm going to start from the beginning and read it again because it's just so good, and I think it'll help everyone to really understand it. So, Heavenly Family, again, please bless us with this. The gospel of truth is joy for those who have received grace from the Father of truth, that they might know him through the power of the Word that came forth from the fullness that is in the Father's thought and mind. The Word is called Savior, a term that refers to the work he is to do to redeem those who had not known the Father. And the term gospel refers to the revelation of hope, since it is the means of discovery for those who seek him. All have sought for the one from whom they have come forth. When all were in him, him whom no one can limit and no one can comprehend, he was beyond every thought, ignorance of the Father brought terror and fear, and terror grew dense like a fog, through which no one could see. Thus, error became powerful. She worked on her own substance in vain, not knowing truth. She assumed an alluring personality while she was preparing, in power and beauty, a substitute for truth. This, however, was no humiliation for him whom no one can limit and no one can comprehend. For this terror and forgetfulness and this deceptive personality were nothing, whereas truth is unchanging, unperturbed, and unadornably beautiful. For this reason, despise error. She has no root. She was in fog regarding the Father. She was there preparing works and deeds of forgetfulness and fear in order by them to entice those of the middle and take them captive. The forgetfulness of error was not apparent. It is no thought from the Father. It was not in the Father's company that forgetfulness came into being, and surely then not because of him. On the contrary, what comes into being in him is knowledge, which appears so that forgetfulness might be destroyed and the Father might be known. Forgetfulness came into being because the Father was not known. So as soon as the Father comes to be known, forgetfulness will cease to be. This is the gospel of him whom is sought, revealed to the perfect through the Father's mercy. Through the hidden mystery, Jesus, the Anointed, enlightened those who were in darkness because of forgetfulness. He enlightened them and showed them the way, and that way is the truth he taught them. Because of this, error was angry with him and persecuted him, but she was distressed by him and brought to naught, or made powerless. Two possible translations. He was nailed to a tree, and he became fruit of the knowledge of the Father. This fruit, however, did not bring destruction when it was eaten. On the contrary, it caused those who ate it to come into being. They were joyful in this discovery, and he found them within himself, and they found him within themselves. As for the one who no one can limit or comprehend, the Father, the perfect one, who made all, and thus within him is all, for him all have need. Although he retained their completeness within himself, that part which he had not given to all, it is not that he was being jealous. For what jealousy could there be between himself and his own members? If this world had received their completeness, they would not have come to the Father. He kept their completeness within himself and gave it to them as a means to return to him with complete single-minded knowledge. He is the one who set everyone in order, and through whom all came to be, and all are in need of him. This is the same as when a person is unknown to others, and wishes to become known, and thus become loved by them. For what did they all need, if not knowledge of the Father? Okay, so I'll stop there for now in terms of reading it, and we will go back to the section right after the part that we unpacked in the New Moon meeting.
Before you do that, there's just something that came to my mind that I'd like to mention if now's a good time.
Sure.
Okay, so as you've been reading, and even prior to the New Moon meeting itself, just I've been contemplating what our Heavenly Family is doing. And part of that contemplation has stemmed from just self-examination and wanting to come to the place of loving the truth so much that, like the Apocryphon of James brings out, I'll be willing to follow the truth no matter if there is any kind of reward. Let's say the Father wanted to banish me. That's the way it's put in the Apocryphon of James. But I would still want to just live according to truth, even though I would not be allowed entrance into the heavenly kingdom. And that type of love for the truth really is what we all need in order to gain entrance into the kingdom of heaven, because that's just the way things operate in a sinless environment. So, did you want to say something before I continue?
Yeah, there's something that crossed my mind, but I don't want to interrupt your train of thought either.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say that, in fact, the Apocryphon of James opposes living according to truth because we were commanded to by God or by Jesus.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In fact, when he says, I'm about to ascend to the place from which I came, come with me if you want.
Yeah.
And they say, if you order us to, or if you bid us to, we will. And he's like, I tell you the truth, no one will ever enter heaven's kingdom because I bid him to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, wow, like he's really advocating throughout the Apocryphon of James not obeying the truth just because God or him said so.
Mm-hmm.
It's no, do it because it's right, and abide by the kingdom of truth, even if the Father wants to banish you. It's like,
that's the crescendo note in the letter.
Exactly. That's actually the last thing that Jesus said to James and Peter before saying, this is all I'm going to say to you now. I've said what I want. I'm now going to ascend. He kind of said goodbye after that. But the last point he wanted to get across to them was that. And he also said, become better than I.
Mm-hmm.
Outdo even me. Be eager to be saved without being urged. Beautiful. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say.
Cool. Yeah, so those are all the aspects that have really been on my mind. And after the last new moon, and then the weeks following, as we've been studying through Revelation chapter 1, I've just really been enjoying and appreciating the way our Heavenly Family is dealing with us. And I know that they don't do things for no reason. I know that they have a purpose and a design in everything that they do, and it's all calculated to help us along as much as possible. at a pace we can handle and, you know, in a way that will be as helpful as possible and all that. So I've been really trying to understand what is it they're doing right now. And so I see that they've been really dealing with kind of the crises that many in the branch have been going through, in various different crises. And one big one, though, has been just the whole process of the shaking, and how Ellen White describes that as people getting shaken off the foundation or the platform of truth, but that some of those people will re-examine the platform and then step back on. And so we've been being shaken for some time. We've had to unlearn many, many lessons, as Ellen White puts it. And that has been very shaking to the majority of us, at least. And so our Heavenly Family has been reinforcing the foundation, including just their very existence. So the last new moon, that was re-emphasized, re-evidenced, and it was absolutely beautiful and very, very strengthening for me and for many others, I'm sure. And then I was like, okay, well, Heavenly Family, where are you going to take us next? Because the other thing that has been kind of agitated in our discussions, like on the Tuesday night meetings going through the testimonies for the church, recently we discussed how we just need to have a love for the truth no matter what. And then Mary shared how, well, even in God's mercy, our Heavenly Family still offers us the promises to help us along in desiring to love truth and follow truth. But, you know, if we turn away from the truth, it shows that we never actually loved the truth in the first place, you know. But as we are now coming to this current month, studying this text and seeing its close connection to the Apocryphon of James and the lessons there, one of the main themes in the Apocryphon of James is that the way Jesus won his crown was working to save others. And he says that this is how you can be saved, by working to save others. Okay, well, very interesting. And now, you know, because connecting that with coming to love the truth for the sake of truth, you know, I just wouldn't want any of us, including myself, to get into studying this text and lose sight of why we're even studying it. And it's not that we're studying it because, oh, that's what we study this month. We're studying it because our Heavenly Family knows that this is what will help us now in our stage of progression in understanding truth and in that coming to the point of loving truth for the sake of truth and getting to the point of being willing to really get to know the truth about ourselves and to see where do we lack, what is keeping us back, what do we cherish more than the truth. And that was one of the main things I wanted to mention, just to kind of, you know, not to get kind of in a rut. Okay, cool, new text. Oh, man, this is exciting. Or what does this text have to say? And just forget and miss out on the whole purpose of it. It's for us as individuals. It's something that will help us receive the new birth. and put an end to sin in our hearts and in our minds. With that said, I can't help but notice the light-darkness language in this text, which ties it. We might miss that because we're used to that in the New Testament. But where did that come from? Well, we've learned that that came from the sectarian documents at Qumran, written by the teacher of righteousness, and maybe others, but,
originating with him.
Yes. And, okay, well, there's another connection with this text and something else that we know to be true. So those are the main things that I wanted to say right now, and I think I'll just leave it at that.
Great. One other thing quickly that I want to highlight from what you're saying, this whole light-darkness thing, truth versus falsehood, error here could also be equally translated falsehood. It's the same thing. It's interesting how, just like with the two ways, studying the two ways, it's designed to get us to see the value of truth and the stupidity of error. This is the same. It emphasizes, just like we have emphasized, that error is nothing. Error is nothing.
Totally.
And it's like, man, seriously, it can really help us to see the nature of, or the lack of nature of error, and to see what truth is all about. It can really help us to come to love truth and to hate error. I mean, it even said in what we read here, it says, for this terror and forgetfulness and this deceptive personality were nothing, whereas truth is unchanging, unperturbed, and unadornably beautiful. For this reason, despise error. She has no root, etc., etc. And it's like, man, no root to it. No, it's just
no substance.
No substance. It just boils down to nothing. And yet truth is unadornably beautiful.
Well, whoever wrote this text definitely falls in the line of truth from Qumran. Because not only is there the light darkness, but, the emphasis on the way.
Yeah. He enlightened them and showed them the way. And that way is the truth he taught them. The way being the truth. That's also very community rule-esque.
If I may share my thoughts that came to mind on New Moon, how forgetfulness, right, came into being because the Father's not known, and therefore, sinning is the effect of that, right? And I couldn't help to reflect on the times when, Trent, you remember you would emphasize for us to study the life of Christ, right? And so how I connected that was because getting to know the Father is like getting to know Christ is like getting to know the Father, right? Because if you've known me, you've known the Father. Isn't that what Jesus says? So that's what has, stayed in my mind ever since New Moon. It's like, okay, there's a key, very important key factor here is getting to know the Father is going to stop sin. And therefore, it's connected to getting to know Jesus because, of course, he was the example on earth for us, right? So thought I'd share that.
Beautiful. Yes, absolutely. And seriously, that... okay. I actually just have to share a few more things that relate to that because that's exactly where this text goes. That's exactly where the gospel of truth goes. So I'm going to kind of go through some of this here and unpack a little bit of it, and I might not unpack every element within this next little section, but I'll read it again and mention some things about it, and then we might read a little bit that we haven't read, even on the New Moon call, that relates to what you just said. So again, this is the gospel of him whom is sought, revealed to the perfect through the Father's mercy. Through the hidden mystery, Jesus, the Anointed, enlightened those who were in darkness because of forgetfulness. Okay, so far it's been emphasizing the fact that in order to get rid of forgetfulness, we have to come to know the Father. But then it says that Jesus is the one who enlightened those who were in darkness because of forgetfulness. He enlightened them and showed them the way, and that way is the truth he taught them. Because of this, error was angry with him and persecuted him, but she was distressed by him and made powerless. He was nailed to a tree. He became fruit of the knowledge of the Father. So notice, it's like the imagery, he's nailed to a tree, and now he's on this tree. Nailed to a tree, by the way, it's a common euphemism among the writings of the early followers of Jesus for the crucifixion, of course. I'm sure people recognize that. So he was nailed to a tree, and he became fruit of the knowledge of the Father. So this is interesting because it also invokes some of the images in the Gospel of John of Jesus saying to eat him, to eat his flesh and drink his blood.
Oh, yeah.
You know? So it's abiding in him and us, us abiding in him and him abiding in us. He says both, and actually it says that in the next part. It says, this fruit, however, did not bring destruction when it was eaten. On the contrary, it caused those who ate it to come into being. They were joyful in this discovery, and he found them within himself, and they found him within themselves. So it's the whole idea of Christ in you, the hope of glory. What does Christ in you mean? Well, it means the contemplation of Christ, contemplating the truth, contemplating the lessons he taught, the meaning of his life, his death, his resurrection. It is abiding in the truth of all of these principles of reality and love. The way he puts it in John is that we are to abide in him like a branch abides in a vine. He says, let my words remain in you. Really beautiful. And for anyone who wants more clarity on that subject of what Christ in you means, there's actually a question and answer on that in a silver trumpet. I think it's volume 1, number 9. So he was nailed to a tree. He became fruit of the knowledge of the Father. This fruit, however, did not bring destruction when it was eaten. So usually we think, oh, the fruit of knowledge, the tree of knowledge. Oh, well, that's bad. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, this is saying that this fruit, the fruit that is Jesus, that was on the tree of the knowledge of the Father, or he is the fruit of the knowledge of the Father, this fruit does not bring destruction. On the contrary, it caused those who ate it to come into being. Okay, now this is an interesting thing. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it right now, but in the Apocryphon of James, it actually talks about this too. It says, be like those who are not, so that you may dwell with them who are not. And it's like, what is that talking about?
And first he said to them, you who exist.
Yeah, exactly. So this whole idea of being or existing, what's that about here? We've talked about this also, the Hebrew word bara. What does it mean to create? And in Genesis, we have this whole thing of God created the heavens and the earth. And yet there's clearly already a sky. There's clearly already an earth there with a watery deep and the Spirit fluttering her wings over the surface of the water. So it's like, okay, it's not talking about the material origins of this. What is it talking about? The Gospel of Truth explains it, actually. And later in the Gospel of Truth, it actually so specifically says that what God causes to come into being was not nothing before he caused it to come into being.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that he brings something from what is, because that which does not exist will not come to exist.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's so clear. It's like, no, not creation ex nihilo, from nothing. You can't bring something from nothing because it doesn't even exist. There's nothing to bring from it. So anyway, really interesting here how this fruit, eating this fruit, caused those who ate it to come into being. Well, clearly they existed. They were already in existence in order to eat the fruit. So it's talking about something else. And what it has to do with is being righteous. And it has to do with this idea that the ways of error are nothing. And those who live according to the ways of error, their life will pass, and it will be as a vapor. It will be as though it never had been. In quantum physics, there's something called virtual particles. It's not that those particles don't exist. No, it's that they come into existence, again, not from nothing. There's actual matter that makes up these particles. But those smaller bits of matter form these particles for such a brief moment in time, and then they're gone.
So they're arranged in a way that produces the particle, and then that arrangement alters so quickly that the particle no longer exists as a particle, but the substance that made up the particle, of course, still exists. It's just you don't know where or in what form.
Exactly. We have no way of specifically detecting it in a way that we can really capture and hone in on, because it's just so fleeting. But this ultimately gets to the whole thing of how empty space, so-called empty space, is not actually empty. It's actually matter. It is material. And these particles just come into existence. Again, they are arranged and become a particle and then disassemble into not being that particle anymore. And so physicists refer to these as virtual particles. And some people think, oh, see, this is like proof of some alternate reality. People have immaterialistic ways of interpreting quantum physics. This is a known thing, by the way. It's called quantum woo. You can look it up. But in reality, it's just that they're not only here today, gone tomorrow, here this instant, gone the next. And so it's just almost as though it just never was. And that's the way the wicked are. For any of us who choose to be wicked, it will one day be as though we never were. Our life in the scope of eternity will be just a blink of an eye. And it's like, man, that's not, that's only the case because of error. Because error is nothing. And if we associate with error and we live according to error, we will become nothing. And that's why those who eat this fruit, which is, again, Jesus, in other words, it's everything he stood for, the truth, it brings us into being. We become something enduring, something permanent, because we leave the ways of falsehood, that which makes us but a shadow, but a vapor, and we become a partaker in truth. Again, this is all through Christ, and it's the knowledge of the Father, because he is the Father's representative. Continuing, it says, they were joyful in this discovering, and he found them within himself, and they found him within themselves. Again, that's just this repeated imagery of Christ in you. As for the one who no one can limit or comprehend, the Father, the perfect one, who made all, and thus within him is all, for him all have need. Okay, so now it's going back to the Father. And it's really interesting. By the way, it says, who made all? Again, unfortunately, so many scholars interpret this text as being Gnostic, and they say things like that the gospel of truth says that basically God has nothing to do with the world, that the material world is just made by some sort of mistake or some sort of flaw in the divine realm, but that the true God is opposed to this material world. Okay, well, here it totally gives a different picture, even though this isn't talking about God making matter. No, it's not addressing that at all. But he made all. But what does it mean for him to make all? Well, again, it gets into that later. But in light of the fact that those who came into being already existed, we can understand that making all here very likely isn't having to do with bringing something into existence which had no prior existence. It actually has to do with order, which again is mentioned later.
Trent?
So, well, yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, what does Christ in you mean? It is in the Silver Trumpet, Volume 1, number 9, page 41. And we are not there yet. We're way in the front. So that's 3/4 of the way. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And that's awesome, actually, that you guys aren't there yet, because you'll get there and you might think back to this and connect it with the gospel of truth. So, yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so, yes, who made all and thus within him is all. Again, it's not talking about God being like, this isn't promoting any sort of pantheism or anything like that, of God being everywhere and everything is just within his essence or something. No, it's he made all, which has to do with him ordering all and naming all. It gets to the naming thing later, too, within the gospel of truth. And thus within him is all. Well, that's talking about within his order, within his kingdom. For him, all have need. Why? Why do we have need of the Father? Because the Father is so great in understanding of truth. The Father is the one who is the ultimate educator of the universe, and we need that. We need to know the ways of truth. Now, this is really, really interesting, this next part. Although he retained their completeness, some translations say perfection or completeness. I think most of us are familiar with the fact that those two concepts are tied together or linked. Although he retained their completeness within himself, that part which he had not given to all, it is not that he was being jealous. Okay, so now this is interesting. It's talking about how God, there's a part which he had not given to all. There's a part of knowledge evidently concerning himself, because remember, it said that he was not fully understood. So he retained their completeness. So the completeness of their knowledge, at least part of this has to do with himself, although it may be broader than that. He retained it, or he kept it within himself and did not reveal it to everyone. It's a part of knowledge that he did not show to all. But it says it's not that he was being jealous. So someone might think, oh, well, God is just keeping some of this knowledge for himself, and that's just a jealous way of being. He's unwilling to share this knowledge of himself and of other things with everyone else. But it's saying, look, it's not that he was being jealous. For what jealousy could there be between himself and his own members? It's like, hey, these are his own people. Why would he be jealous to share it with them? And then it says this: if this world had received their completeness being the completeness of their knowledge, they would not have come to the Father. Interesting. He kept their completeness within himself and gave it to them as a means to return to him with complete, single-minded knowledge. He is the one who set all in order, or who set everyone in order. So this is where it's explaining this idea. He is the one who set everyone in order, and through whom all came to be, and all are in need of him. Okay, so now it's explaining a bit of why this needs to be like this, why he couldn't just reveal all at once. It's pointing out, okay, he is the one who set everyone in order, and all came into being through him. And all came to be. Again, came to be is coming to knowledge. It's not about not existing and then existing.
And yet it is creation language. So it goes to show
Exactly.
that we've misunderstood creation language.
Absolutely. And let's see, there's another part in the Gospel of Truth. I'm going to see if I can find it quick that even explains this more fully. Okay, yeah. It says, all the worlds are from him. This is later in column, I'm thinking scrolls language. This is page 27 of the Codex. All the worlds are from him. They know that they have come from him as children who were within a mature person, but who knew that they had not yet received form or were being given a name. The Father brings forth each of them when they receive the essence of his knowledge. So now it's explaining, what is it when it says the Father brings them forth? And it's the same language as when it says he brings them forth into being. It's when they receive the essence of his knowledge. That's when they come to be, just like we just read of eating the fruit, which is the fruit of the knowledge of the Father, and thus they came to be. So them coming to be is getting the essence of his knowledge. Otherwise, though they were in him, they could not know him. The Father is perfect, and he knows every world within himself. If he wishes, what he wishes appears when he gives it form and a name. And he does give it a name. And he brings into being those who before coming into being were ignorant of the one who made them. I am not saying that those who have not yet come to be are nothing. Like, how much more clear could this be? They are within one who may wish that they come into being, if at some future point he so wishes. And then it goes on, etc., etc. And actually, I'll skip ahead and read this next little part. Thus, each world in the Father comes from what is, but what has set itself up is from what is not. For whatever has no root has no fruit, and although thinking, I have come into being, it will perish by itself. So whatever does not exist will never exist. Okay, so it really is going on quite clearly in this section and in what follows even beyond what I just read, describing how the things which had not yet come into being, what it means for them to not have come into being is that they were in ignorance. What it means for them to come into being is for them to receive the essence of the Father's knowledge. This sounds kind of like Qumran type language, where the teacher of righteousness in one of the Thanksgiving hymns says that God taught him the source of his knowledge, the source of his insight.
Mm-hmm.
Then he goes on to describe truth and falsehood and this paradigm of what is and what is not. And ultimately it boils down to what is. So this is really describing how the Father teaching beings about truth. What is truth? That brings them order. And that gives them a purpose. That gives them a name. That gives them insight. That is what it means for them to come into being. prior to that, they were not. Now they actually existed. It actually says that I'm not saying that those who have not yet come to be are nothing. So anyway, it brings things into the full reality of living according to truth, not being in ignorance. So very, very interesting. There's obviously a lot to learn from that, and I think that impacts many, many things. But anyway, something interesting to keep in mind. Now, to continue on a bit here, this is going back to earlier, no longer in the section that I just read, which is on page 27 of the Codex. This is going back to page 19 of the Codex. This is the same as when a person is unknown to others and wishes to become known and thus become loved by them. Okay, so now this is talking about how, the Father didn't reveal everything to them. Why? Well, it's because he's unknown to others and he wishes to become known and thus become loved by them. So that's why he didn't actually reveal everything at once, because if he had revealed everything at once, they wouldn't have come to him. That's what it just said prior. If this world had received the completeness that he had to give, they wouldn't have come to him. So instead, he has retained it and given it to them in order to cause them to return to him. So basically, what this is saying is that the Father recognized that in order for there to be a genuine relationship with the rest of the beings of the universe whom he brought to be, whom he gave the essence of his knowledge, there needed to be a genuine progression of experience. No two people in love begin their relationship by handing the other a data workbook concerning themselves, which the other person is to study at the beginning of the relationship. No, you're supposed to dynamically go through things together, and you learn more about the person as time goes on. It's the same reason why we don't eat a meal by condensing our food into as small of a portion as possible and then swallowing it. No, you chew your food, you savor it, you enjoy it, and it's a process. It's not about the end result. It's about going through the process. And that's what the Father is interested in doing. He wants to get to know people and people to get to know him. And just, hey, that's just part of things, that you're not going to just come out with everything. It's a very natural way of going about things. It would be odd not to. And that does just leave one with the possibility of misinterpreting someone else because they don't know them fully yet. And so, the more you get to know someone, the more likely you are to understand them correctly when they express themselves. The less you know someone, the more likely you are to read them incorrectly. And that's what happened. The Father is just like, hey, we need to get to know each other. And because there has to be this genuine process, and there's much more to learn about the Father, people misinterpreted him and clung to their misinterpretations.
Isn't that the whole reason why? This is basically the same as saying that God doesn't give us all the truth there is in the world all at once. That's why no prophet has ever had 100% understanding of everything there is to know. They still retain whatever misunderstandings may exist about something that isn't a part of their message of revelation, but because the revelation they're receiving doesn't include this other aspect, that other aspect could still be a misunderstanding and thus be technically wrong. But we can't handle everything all at once, or else we wouldn't even go to God.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we can't handle everything all at once. It's just impossible. Like, again, everyone, this has nothing to do with sin or righteousness. This just has to do with the fact that it's like the actual amount of information that is contained in this material universe is incomprehensible. Like, it is just so much, we cannot possibly take it all in at once. And thus, a partial understanding often leads to a misunderstanding. That's just natural. If we don't understand something fully, we're bound to understand something incorrectly. That's not actually the problem. The problem is when we allow that to cloud our judgment. And that's, like earlier when it talked about the origin of error, yes, the first step is a lack of understanding of the Father, but it doesn't say that that's bad. It doesn't say that a lack of understanding is itself bad. In fact, the Father purposely didn't reveal all concerning himself. It's just the fact that, okay, because of that lack of understanding, there was a possibility for misunderstanding, and then people misunderstood him in a way that caused them to have terror and fear. And then it says terror grew dense like a fog through which no one could see. Now, this is saying that it caused even greater misperception. That's where the problem is.
Amen.
When we, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, go ahead.
I know we have less than 5 minutes before we'll have to call back in or whatever, but the other thing that came to my mind when you were just saying what you were about all that is that we need to remember these principles when we share truth with others, and to try to be very wise in what we share, when, and with whom, so as not to actually hurt someone with whom we're trying to share truth. We don't want to just poke truth down their throat because, here, you need this. It's going to do you good. No, you can choke on something if it doesn't go down just right.
Mm-hmm.
And if our Heavenly Family knows we can't handle things all at once, shouldn't we try to emulate their way of doing things and seek to understand our audience and to know exactly how best to help them, what would help them, what wouldn't, and to follow those principles? That's basically what's being stated here, isn't it?
Yeah, and what you just said is actually just such a great example of how badly we need the Father. Because otherwise, either we'll go with error, or in our zeal for truth, we will end up destroying people with it. And it's like the Father, seriously, like our Heavenly Family is just really, really, really wise. Like they really do have a very, very good understanding of the nature of reality and how to handle people in situations and so on. And we need to learn from them. And that's the next sentence here. For what did they all need if not the knowledge of the Father? And then the next part goes on about how Jesus became a guide and a teacher. And it's really cool. And there's more about how getting the knowledge of the Father comes through Jesus. So we'll get into that tomorrow night. But we've been on for almost an hour and a half, and we only have really just a couple minutes before our calling card will end. So we're just going to end the meeting tonight, and obviously we'll thank our Heavenly Family and all that, but we'll end the meeting for tonight. If you guys have more to say and you don't want to forget it, just write it down and you can mention it on tomorrow night's call, or you can post it in the Branch Davidian SDA Facebook group, whatever ends up being. But for now, we'll just end the meeting, and I'll just thank our Heavenly Family. Heavenly Family, thank you so very much for the gospel of truth, like the actual good news of truth. And also, we are very grateful for this writing and its explanation of it. Thank you so much for guiding us to contemplate these. Please help us to understand this text and this message more and more clearly. Thank you so much for the Sabbath as well. Please bless us, give us a knowledge of the truth, and help us to live love. Todah, thank you. We ask this in the name of Branch. Amen.
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 All right, shalom, everyone.
Shalom.
Shalom. Good night. Happy Sabbath.
Good night.